Prynhawn da, good afternoon, croeso, welcome. Lovely to have you join us. Diolch yn fawr. Hello. Just about to get started. I can see lots of people filing in really quickly. Good to have you join us. Diolch yn fawr. Croeso cynnes I chi gyd. Welcome. We're just about to start our data science webinar series. Next one, you can see the title up on the screen, using artificial intelligence to assist in content design. And personally, I'm fascinated. Can't wait to see what's gone on here. Hope you feel the same about this too. Diving into the data science of it with Mr. Joe Lewis, who's our senior data scientist in Welsh Government. Joe's going to be leading. We're joined by Mr. Mike Hutchins as well, who's a lead content designer and I suppose a customer of Joe's in the sense of coming to the data science team to look at what artificial intelligence can do. So I'm waffling for a moment or two more just to make sure we've got everybody in. You can see there's about 36 already here. Croeso cynnes, well, warm welcome. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us. As ever, please say hello in the chat. You know, if you'd like to say hello, who you are, maybe what you're having for lunch, if you're eating something sneaky off camera, that would be interesting. Keep your questions for the chat as well. We are recording the session as it's a little bit unusual. We don't always record these sessions, but we will be recording this one. There's lots of interest. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, please make sure your camera's off. But we will stop recording after the presentation section so we can have questions and answers. See if we can catch Joe out maybe, you know, with a tricky question. But that's the situation. So, okay, I guess without further ado, we're already 3 minutes past. We're ready to get started. So, croeso cynnes I chi gyd, warm welcome, as I've said, to everyone. Diolch yn fawr am ddod. Thank you for coming and joining us. We are today looking at using artificial intelligence to assist in content design. And I'm going to hand over to Mr. Joe Lewis, the Senior Data Scientist from Welsh Government, to take us forward. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks very much, Peter. I will start getting my share screen up and introduce Mike, who's our lead content designer in Welsh Government, who's going to set the scene a bit on sort of why the content design team came to us and sort of what we hope to do in the future. So, Mike, if you're right, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, as Joe says, I'm a lead content designer in the corporate digital team at Welsh Government, and the team I work for are responsible for the development, maintenance and standards for gov.wales, and this includes content quality. As I'm sure you're all aware, there's more pressure on resources and more demands being made for digital content. So we were keen to see if there was a way we could find a way to streamline the content design process for gov.wales. We gave it some thought, and one approach we happened upon was to see if there was any way to use AI to improve either the quality of the content or the content design process itself. After talking this through, we decided we want to find out if there was a way for AI to review or produce first drafts of content that could meet or but we hope that by getting a quality first or better quality first draft, it would help out carry out some of that initial triage, and so then when it does land upon the desk of a content designer, it's already in a good state. The thinking behind this approach was that something like this could be done with AI. It could provide some benefits, such as making the whole content design process quicker, speeding up the time from origination to publication. It helped to make content quality across gov.wales more consistent, and it would also then free up content designers to spend more time working in areas where their specific expertise is best focused. Once we had this approach or this idea, we got in touch with the data science team and Joe and explained what we were thinking of and asked them if this is something they could work with us to deliver. So Joe is now going to talk you through the project and the work that he and his team have been doing to carry this out.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mike. So as Mike said, we're going to be talking about using AI as content design assistant. It's going to be a bit of a practical intro, I guess, to using off-the-shelf LLM or AI tools in a sort of real process and applying it to a kind of business problem. And we're also going to get into a bit of an introduction to the product that we developed off the back of the discovery work, which we've called Dylan, who's our AI-powered content design assistant. So before we get into the kind of technical detail of the LLM and the AI and all that sort of thing, I thought I'd give a bit of a primer on content design for anyone who's not familiar. So for the purposes of this project, we've limited the scope of our work to text-based content only. So we're not focusing on things like images, tables, charts, and things like that we also publish on our Gov.Wales site, but we are just focusing on the text-based content that's around that. What that actually looks like, it could be written guidance, announcements, press releases, blogs, and a bunch of other things that go up on our gov.wales platform. And the audience for that content is anyone who's accessing gov.wales. I'd imagine a lot of the people in this call will have done that for various different things. And that may include second language English speakers, it might include people with access requirements, and it may include people who are in a hurry looking to get to the information they need to find quite quickly and interpret it and understand what's going on in, quite fast. So what we understand of content design and what we've included in the tool sort of from the beginning of the project is our ideas of well-designed and poorly designed content. So well-designed content will break text down into sort of logical sections. You'll have headers, you'll have introductions, bullet points to different sections where appropriate. It'll avoid things like metaphors, superlatives, and some complex terms, and it will tend to use only one idea per sentence. Poorly designed content, on the other hand, will do the opposite of a lot of that stuff. So we're talking about using long and complex paragraphs and words where they're not necessary, having few headers so it's difficult to find what you're looking for, using unintroduced abbreviations and unnecessary words. All of that has a effect on our audience when they're consuming our content, with well-designed and accessible content being important for everybody. Users accessing that site benefit from finding and interpreting information quickly and easily, but we also have a legal obligation to ensure that all our content is accessible to everybody, and those with access requirements do not face barriers when they consume our content. So a bit of a background on our goal and what we tried to do from the start. So this project began in July of last year, and we started off on a real sort of discovery process, a scoping and exploring of how much LLMs can do. And so we started the work to see to what extent the AI models could get involved in content design. Could they take something from at the start to a finished product? We thought that might be quite unlikely, but we also looked at sort of whether they could be sort of scaled back and applied to different parts of the process and where they could have the most benefit. Where we've landed now and where we're going to get to over the course of the slides is a better first draft. So our aim is to get to this kind of better first draft idea. So never going from someone without content design experience to an AI model directly to our Gov.Wales platform. That's not what we're aiming to do. We're aiming to get from someone without content design experience, improve their content to a kind of better first draft, and then hand that off to a professional content designer in Mike's team who would catch any of the sort of more challenging errors, and then it would go to our website. So all of our content would still be sort of verified, fact-checked, and sort of checked for accessibility and all those other things by a content designer. We started by looking at what work had already been done. So we did a bit of a literature review of a few different techniques that we'd seen. And something that's very common sort of before and at the beginning of the introduction of LLMs as a common tool and technology was sentence simplification. So sentence simplification was interesting in that it obviously has parallels to what we're trying to do. We are trying to simplify some of the content where possible, but it doesn't quite align fully with content design and all the things that we were trying to do. We want to sort of check the logical flow of content. We want to break things down into sections. We want to check those expressions, metaphors, things like that. We're not just looking to simplify sentence by sentence. But what was interesting from this one, the authors found that the sort of simple prompts were much more effective compared to complex ones. So giving the AI models loads and loads to do ended up sort of providing more of a challenge than it was worth. They also use some sentence level metrics to assess the performance, so see how difficult some sentences are to read. But we sort of were thinking about aggregating that up to think about how we look at a whole piece of content and grade that quite quickly using some common metrics. The next thing we looked at was benchmarking multiple LLMs for simplification, which was a really interesting one that looked at different models and how they tended to perform on sentence simplification tasks. We found some really cool sort of metrics in there, automated metrics, things like reading grade levels and things like that, that had been used to assess how well the models had done that we took forward into our work. The last thing that we looked at was the most recent of the papers, and there's some stuff that's been published really recently that I can send links to if anyone is interested in this academic approach. But looking at sort of a whole piece of content similar to what we're trying to do, and thinking about easy read text in particular. So easy read text is all about making things easier to read for people with cognitive impairments, and there's a lot of really good guidance online. But what this paper does is provide a detailed breakdown of pieces of easy read guidance that you can provide to different AI models or large language models, and it highlights where the pitfalls are and where the things that the models do really well are. One of the things that's emphasized from this is that models don't tend to be trained in this task. So it's all about thinking about how you can grind in your instructions to make it as easy as possible for the AI models, which is one of the things that we kind of took forward again for the work. So what I've done here is just highlighted the sort of actionable parts of those papers that we took forward into our sort of scoping work. So the simple prompts being more effective than complex ones, looking at the automated metrics, which I'll explain a bit more in a few slides time, and also this breakdown of easy read guidance. This was sort of written guidance that other models have been shown to understand quite well. So that was obviously a real kind of working point for the rest of our work. So on to the exciting parts, which is our experiments with LLMs. So we tested 4 different models. You might have heard of these if you're big in the sort of AI space at the minute, but if not, you can think of them all as quite similar to kind of ChatGPT and Copilot. What we're able to do though is get into a bit more of the kind of developer settings, I guess, is a nice way to think about it, and mess with some of the parameters of the model to really focus them on the task that we're trying to do and make them a bit more bespoke to apply to our process. So the models that we tested were Llama 2 and 3.1, which are both obviously the meta models. And we've got the Mistral model, which is an open source large language model, and 5.3, which is provided by Microsoft. All of these were working in a cloud platform, which is a kind of secure environment for us to work in, but all the stuff that we're using is already published content anyway. We're comparing these kind of LLM outputs with 8 examples of content before and after design by an internal content design professional. So we're very grateful to Mike and his team for providing sort of gold standard examples for us to use. So what we did was we had the original that was written by someone without content design experience, a gold standard that was rewritten by that professional content designer, and then we produced a similar sort of rewrite based on the original using an AI model. We measured success in terms of, is the content easier to read? So we assessed that using the Flesch-Kincaid reading grade. And then we also checked if the original meaning of the content had been retained. And we assessed that using something called the BERT score. The Flesch-Kincaid reading grade you might have heard about before or seen in other editors, things like the Hemingway app provide it, Microsoft Word provides it if you sort of dig around and try to find it in there. So that's sort of all about assessing how difficult something is to read. And then the BERT score is something from machine learning and kind of data science, where you're looking at how similar 2 pieces of text are. So obviously we want to simplify the text that we're getting out, but you could simplify something by just taking out all the difficult words, but that might change the original meaning of the content. We want to avoid AI hallucinations and we want to avoid oversimplification. So we've done this to sort of make sure that the LLMs are being penalized if they just cut out all the text. A bit of an explainer in particular on the reading grade level, which I thought was interesting and useful to anyone who's thinking of doing a similar kind of project or looking at accessibility and automated metrics for it. So the FKGL is a measure of how difficult the text is to read. As I said, it's based on the sort of calculating the word length, sentence lengths, and paragraph lengths and combining that into a single number. That number then roughly translates to the American school grades, and it estimates what grade someone would be expected to be able to read a piece of text. There are lots of other reading grade metrics available, so Dale Call is one example, and that scores text based on how rare words are in the document sets. So we did look at applying this as well, but the challenge that we have with this one is some of the stuff that we write is quite unique and it is quite rare. If we're writing some guidance about a medical topic or a statistical topic or a scientific topic, something like that, then the words tend to be rarer, so we're sort of unfairly penalising ourselves there. So there's some sort of context clues that we need to take based on how we do these assessments. We use the FKGL as a bit of a sort of quick assessment of how lots of iterations of the model are doing. As you can imagine, early on we ran lots of different prompts on lots of different models, so we wanted to work out quite quickly what was working and what wasn't. For the later sort of assessments and when this sort of process is rolled out, we'll also have that sort of manual review by a content designer and things like that. So it's not the only assessment of readability and accessibility that we're going to be doing. And there's a great blog there that I can link to. I think you might be able to click this link directly, but I can post it after on some of the fallen over points, I guess, of the limitations of the FKGL metric. So onto prompting for content design then. So what our prompts look like really is something like this, and it broadly breaks down into 3 key areas. So the first one is this first block of text here, which is what we call the system prompt. So this is how we're giving the LLM, the AI model, a role, and we're saying you are a content designer tasked with making content easy to read. And we supply some guidance, and you must respond in Markdown format. This is something that all the models did quite well. The Markdown format is really nice because then we can just layer it into another template, and it sort of cuts out some of that sort of going from Word into a Markdown format ready for a website and things like that. The next bit is the instructions. So after this sort of hash here for the title of the instructions, then we've got the sort of individual things that we're looking for the model to do. So I've included a few different examples of things in here. So include only one idea per sentence, use simple, commonly used language, avoid passive voice, avoid double negatives, and some other things also are tested in different prompts. The last bit then is the content to edit. So that's provided in these angle brackets. So that's just a placeholder for the content that we're going to add in. We initially tested something called few shot prompting. So before we tried this kind of guidance and roles, we tried saying, here's 3 examples of what a content designer has done. Now apply what you've learned from this to a new piece of text. This didn't work out very well. We are testing smaller models that are available through things like ChatGPT, but what we found was that the models tended to comment on the original pieces of text and got confused on what needed editing and what was edited and jumbled a bunch of stuff up together. So instead, we resulted in this sort of simpler system and guidance prompt formatted appropriately for each of the models. The other thing that we tried was thinking about React prompts. So thinking about how LLMs can review content. So we give it a role of a content critic. We ask it to critique the accessibility and readability of text. We ask it to provide feedback in bullet point form and explain the reasoning behind that. These prompts weren't as effective. We didn't spend a lot of time on this because of the sort of early results weren't looking too promising, but it's something that we haven't ruled out and would like to come back to at some point later on. And when you see the sort of tool that we've developed off the back, I think it's quite easy to see where this could slot in and be quite a useful addition. So we're thinking about doing that once it comes back in scope, I guess, for the next round of development. The other thing that I thought is worth noting for anyone who's used LLMs or AI models like these before, or anyone who might have attended one of our previous talks on retrieval augmented generation, this is really similar to that, where our system and guidance prompts are staying exactly the same for each experiment and model combination, only the context, which is the actual content to be edited, is updated. We also simplify things a little bit for ourselves by providing that text in a Markdown format. So we don't take Word documents and PDFs and things like that for simplicity, but that's something that we can quite easily expand and add into the tool later on. So onto some results and what our sort of outcomes were, I guess. So the first thing that we tested obviously was that simplify this text prompt. So we took out some of that guidance that was there before. We just asked the model, simplify this text, and we added a few extra points in there to sort of guide that simplification process. In 7 out of 8 of those cases, the AI Flesch Kincaid grade level was lower than the original. So that's the sort of success in the rewrite simplifying the text. In 3 out of 8 of those cases, the AI lowered the reading grade more than the human had done, but this was really by a significant amount. So for complete transparency, things like the 20 mile an hour, you see this slight difference there. So it's sort of similar and in line with the human FKGL. One of the things that's worth particularly noting in here, and this is where we really see the benefit then of adding in that professional content design review at the end and the sort of importance of the experience of the content designers, is this medical example here. What the AI has managed to do is, yep, it's reduced the reading grade level, that's brilliant, but the content designers are able to handle what's potentially a more difficult topic to write about with more kind of scientific language and things, and to sort of reduce that grade level more significantly and overcome that challenge. We then tested more complex prompts. So this time we asked the LLM to follow more extensive, easy read guidance. So this is some from that academic paper that I mentioned early on. So that's things like your metaphor, expression, passive voice, and some of the things that we tried to write out and sort of replace with sort of simpler language and alternatives to those things. There's a smaller reduction in the reading age here. Easy read is a more complex idea for the model to work with. We're asking it to do a lot more, which is in line with our sort of complex prompt being a bit more challenging. What we did find though is that that's kind of in line with what our idea, at least, of easy read content is. It's not necessarily only the simplification task. There's more things in there to consider. So things like removing an expression may result in adding more words, but that ultimately does simplify the text that's there. I'll do a bit of a manual review then. So what did we think? We obviously, we don't have the professional content design experience in the data science team, but we are consumers of online content. So we thought we'd see what we thought of the results to sort of give that view to this presentation. So we found that the LLM rewrites always improved the original content in almost all of the cases that we had. There were some of the models that didn't do as well, and I'll get into those in a second. But what we found was that the text was often grouped into sections quite well, the language was simplified, but the model sometimes went a bit too far, breaking everything down into bullet points, and it sometimes gave a bit of a disjointed kind of read-in feel. Content designers found some of the LLM edits to be positive, the same as we did, but the particular comments that they picked up on was the sections could have had more of a logical flow to them, and sometimes there was repetition. So if topic 1 was talked about at the top of a document and then brought up later again at the end, then a content designer would see those, group them together, so they're either talked about at the top or at the end or somewhere else in the piece of content. Whereas what the AI model had done was simplified at the top, simplified at the bottom, but not necessarily unified those two ideas. So that was something that we tried to grind into the model a bit more based on that feedback, and it's something that we've actually ended up doing quite well now, is sort of grouping those topics together a bit more clearly. So what do you think? These slides will be available as part of the recording, so don't feel too much pressure to read through all the text that's on here now. This is one example that we've got on the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, looking at the original piece of content on the furthest left there, the AI edits in the middle, and then the original after the human edits, that kind of gold standard of what we ended up publishing on the right. The particular thing to note in here is that both the AI and the human edits have taken it out of this FAQ format. That's something that both were asked to do. It's against our style guide at the moment to write in that FAQ format. We tried to write section header content in that sort of structure rather than the FAQs, because they can be difficult to understand. Some of the things that I sort of picked out as quite useful for these was the lower driving speed should result in lower tyre, road and brake abrasion in that final paragraph, the first sentence. Whereas on the furthest, in the AI model, we've got should result in lower wear and tear on tyres, roads and brakes. So maybe a bit of a simpler sentence there. But in the case of the human example, they actually kept that in. So we've always got the option to sort of take the human edit or the AI option there. The other thing that the sort of content designers have done is split down into bullet points where the model hasn't, but we'll see on the next slide an example of where the content has been sort of simplified into bullets from the AI model. So this is a case where things went a bit too far in terms of how the model had simplified text, but it's quite easy to see how these bullet points have done the first shot of simplification to then join up together into a sort of unified piece of content. This is guidance on carbon monoxide and new regulations for landlords, and it's the original example that we showed right at the start on the sort of goals slide. The thing that I wanted to pick out of this one in particular is this idea of carbon monoxide as a silent killer, which is that kind of expression, I suppose, of what carbon monoxide is. In the AI sort of rewrite, we've taken that expression and it's sort of been split out what exactly it is. So a dangerous gas that can't be seen or smelled. So sort of they're removing that expression in that case. So, oops, sorry, wrong way. So onto the kind of limitations of the models. So we've carried on kind of iterating from there, and we've chosen the highest performing models, Llama 3.1, to keep going and sort of improve what we've managed to do. But a bit of guidance for anyone looking to do something similar, I've included why we did that. So Llama 2 is a chat-tuned model rather than an instruction-tuned model. A lot of these AI models start off as just generate text. There's no sort of clear mission, I guess, for them to go down. Whereas later on then we tend to tune them, or the companies that produce them or the organizations that produce them tend to tune them. So Llama 2 was tuned for chat, so sort of conversationally talking with a human. It was the oldest model and it was the worst performing. It tended to respond something like, hey, here's your edited content and things, which was useless to us, that sort of extra text around it. The responses often end up being too informal for something that would end up on our gov.wales site, so we ruled that one out of contention. We then looked at Mistral 7 billion, which is a sort of smaller model than some of the other ones that we tested, and it did quite well at that critique step that we talked about earlier on. It was fairly consistent in its critique of content, and it performed better than most of the other models. But in terms of this task, the sort of content design process, it wasn't as good as the highest performers, the Llama 3.1 and the 5 models. What we did find with the Mistral model, if anyone is interested in other AI projects and things, we've used it for tasks like summarization and question and answers, and we found this done really, really well there. So it's likely that kind of instruction tuning process is sort of grinding more on the question and answering and the sort of factual stuff rather than the editing stuff that the other models are able to do. The Phi and the Llama 3.1 models, as I said, they were the best performers. They were the latest releases, so there's no real big shock there. Llama 3.1 was also the biggest model, 8 billion parameters, so an extra billion things to mess around with rather than Mistral. And they also provide support for those system prompts, whereas Mistral does not. So one of the things I'd say is my big piece of advice for using these models is look at that system prompt and how you can use it effectively to say, you are a content designer, do this task, rather than trying to grind all that information into a single kind of prompt, I guess. So onto the problems across all the models. And what we found was none of the models followed the Welsh Government Style Guide consistently. The Welsh Government Style Guide is available online, and it's one of the things that Mike's team and Roland's team, another lead content designer, work on to publish that style guide. So it tells us how to write about certain topics for the web. Some of those are really easily enforced. So things like do not use words like impact, state what you're actually doing, is sort of plain English warning in there. But others are a bit trickier to catch. So as an example, I've pulled out the use of the word deaf. And when we're talking about people who use British Sign Language as their first language, we use deaf with a capital D, whereas when describing someone with any form of hearing loss, we use that lowercase d. So that's quite difficult for us to catch and sort of pattern match and work out what's gone wrong there and to guide the AI model, because there's a lot of sort of context things in there that we need to tell the AI model about how that should be used. No models are able to make full use of that style guide correctly, but we're going to get on to how we've addressed that in the next few slides. The other thing that we've got in there is Americanization. All the models are trained predominantly on US English instead of UK English. Our style guide is obviously to write in UK English. So some of these, again, really easy to catch, the sort of use of the Z, so Americanize over Americanize with an S. But others are a bit trickier, and again, depend on the context or the phrase that we're using. So Americans will fill out a form, whereas we will fill in a form. So things like that are the, some of the other points where these models sometimes fall over and that we need to review ourselves. Another example on here that's a little bit of a joke, but also quite a serious problem when we're using LLMs for these sorts of tasks, is that LLMs tend not to write in a way that humans speak. So we try to control that to some extent using our prompts. So we say write in a formal style, for example, and we also provide that original content. You know, we're never asking LLMs to draft from scratch, and there's, you know, a couple of potential risks of doing that. We always provide a first draft by a human, and this sort of, you know, got the tone right, I suppose. The other thing that we do, as I said, we can get into those parameters of the model. So we use medium to low temperature parameters. If you're not familiar with what a temperature parameter is, if you use Copilot at all, you've got that option for more precise or more creative text. A temperature parameter really is just sort of a numeric binding on that, so you can get a bit more sort of fine-grained into how creative you want these models to be. For this task, we use a medium to low parameter, temperature parameter, because we kind of want it to be a bit creative. We want it to do some of that redesigning and replace words in places. For tasks like summarization or question answering that we've looked at, we obviously want very factual, grounded responses, so we use very, very low temperature values. So from those limitations, we took a bit of a back to basics and think about maybe the whole tool for content design isn't an AI model. Maybe the AI model is just a part of that wider process of what content design can look like and what a content design assistant should be. So we've resorted to traditional pattern matching techniques. Anyone familiar with regular expressions will know that you can use them to sort of catch different patterns and mismatches in text. So a lot of these are still context-based as well. So the pattern matching doesn't work to a full extent. So that's why we've then moved to an assistive role for the model. You know, we're not aiming to go from but, you know, the original content right to the end finished product. It's this assistive role that we can start using. So what we've done is begun developing a bit of a front end for our users to begin testing. This helps with some of the high level problems. Users can choose to accept or reject style guide tips and update wording to be more appropriate for publication. So enough talking about that. Let's look at what it actually looks like in action. So I'm really excited to introduce Dylan, which is a bit of a play on the Welsh word for design, and also gives a bit of a name to our content design assistant. It's a proof of concept to assist with our content design. So the screenshots that I'm going to show you today are from that sort of proof of concept, looking at what this looks like as a tool, where users interact with it and things like that. And we're hoping to sort of develop these tools and put these into users' hands over the next few weeks and months to test and get that real road testing of what we're trying to do. So we'll be excited to update on that in the future as well. So this is what the app looks like. Again, don't feel obliged to read through the actual content that's in there. I'm aware that's a little bit small. So we're just going to tag and mark up where things are. So on the furthest left here, this is where a user will add their content ready for a redesign. So the example that I've got in there at the minute is all about smoke-free premises in Wales. The next stage is reviewing your content. So it's assigned a reading grade based on the sort of Flesch and K grade level metric that we talked about. And users can then select what they're trying to produce. Are they producing an FAQ? Is it policy guidance? Is it a blog? And various things like that. So then we tweak the prompt a little bit based on those different content types. On the right then, users hit that Use AI Editor button, and then we're ready to go, and the AI starts generating new content for them. So in this case, you can see one of the things that we've done is split down into those bullet points, some simplification of the text and things like that, and we've ended up with a new reading grade level at a 10. So this is the content that's ultimately been rewritten by AI, and in this case, it was a success in reducing the reading grade. Users still have the final say over their content. So this is by no means a kind of mandatory, accept what the AI says. We still review that in more detail then against our Welsh Government Star Guide. So that Star Guide, which is published online, we've converted into a bit of a table to look up where those things can go in a piece of content. So as an example, I'm going to pull out 3 different ones here to sort of highlight over. The first of those is this public health at the very top. So that's highlighted in yellow, and there's quite a few other sort of yellowy orange highlights in there. And what we've got is a lowercase warning here. So in our Star Guide, public health should be lowercase, but obviously taken from the context here, we're talking about the Public Health Wales Act. So that's absolutely right that it should be capitalized. Users can reject that change and it'll untag it everywhere throughout that piece of content then. So then you don't have to worry about that warning. It's just sort of notifying them, hey, maybe you might want to think about this. The next one is the purple warning here, which is on impact. This is one of the ones that we went into in a bit of an example earlier. This is that plain English warning. In the Star Guide, we've got some information on that. So use a different word, try to use a sort of don't use a synonym, have an effect or influence. So think about what you're actually trying to do here to have an impact. And then the other example that I've got is this green child dash minding. So the yellow child dash minding switch to the green down here. We want to use this as a bit of a capability thing as well. Think about upskilling, get people thinking about content design and what they're trying to do. So we don't just want to tell people off with the things that have gone wrong and the improvements that we can make to their content. If a user's done something right, we want to flag that as well, so they learn and get that sort of positive feedback on what they're trying to do. So child minding is an example where in our Style Guide, we have child dash minding should be one word. It should just be child minding. So we flag that in green and we say, hey, great job on this one. This is absolutely right. The other thing that we looked at and tried to wrap into the tool, which was kind of our latest development at the end of our discovery, just to see what we could do more than anything else, is starting to think about where the Welsh language fits into all of this. So we've had some really great discussions with Bangor University and used some models from Bangor University and Bangor AI, thinking about where the Welsh language fits into it, looking at sentence level translation using AI models. So again, what we're aiming for here is never to publish something directly from this, but to get a bit of a better first draft together for our translation teams to look at and work with after a piece of content has been designed, to think about how we can sort of drive efficiencies in that process as well. I should say as well, sorry, there's also some stuff, some really great stuff online on accessible and easy read text in Welsh from Learning Disability Wales that we've seen lately that we also want to include and start thinking about how we can sort of factor that into the content design in Welsh process. The other things that I wanted to highlight and sort of pull out was the further examples that I've got in here. So this is one where we've done a particularly good job in sort of simplifying the text according to the sort of reading age metric in particular. So what we've got is a shift in focus to an announcement. So this is an announcement all about electronic sheep movement reporting systems. So I picked this as a bit of a mouthful just to think about the title. So I thought it might be quite a complex piece of text to work with. So we really want to road test what the model could do. And in this case, it simplified the text by quite a long way. But we've also seen a bit of a shift in the tone. So one of the things that we asked the models to do is to address the reader directly. And this is an example here where you've got the you can now use. So I do apologize, the screenshot's a little bit blurry there, but hopefully you can make out the shift in addressing the reader and the update to the reading grade down the bottom. The last example that I've got pulled out of the app is thinking about FAQs. So as I said, it's against our Style Guide to write FAQs. So what we do with this is we actually cheat the system a little bit. And rather than saying to the model, hey, here's a piece of FAQ content, rewrite this, make it more accessible. And we don't expect the model to just know that it should take those FAQs out. So what we actually do here is work in a 2-stage process. So stage 1 is, hey, here's a piece of content that's got FAQs in it. Stage 2 is now simplify that content. So we sort of say take the FAQs out and then simplify. That two-stage process may be something that's interesting to you if you are looking to do something similar. If you're using tools like Copilot and things like that, it might be quite tricky to get all of this into one go. So it's definitely worth thinking about where two-stage processes or multiple stage processes of editing content can kind of factor in. And that's something that we're going to be exploring as we sort of meet more challenging examples and things like that. So onto a bit of a design stuff, so a bit of a sort of geek out, I guess, on some of the tech stack behind all of this. So our design at the moment, as I said, we are hosting a lot of this internally. So we're hosting the LLM and accessing that via a normal REST API. So if you used APIs at all, that's a very similar process to that. But the way we've designed our work is that the client, so the application itself, so the front end, is doing all the legwork. It's taking the inputs, it's running the front end, and it's formatting the prompts and responses from the model. Whereas then on our sort of server side, or where we're interacting with the models, that's all very lightweight. All it's doing is running an LLM that can deal with these queries. There are still challenges to that. It's important to do because it means that we got a reduced cost and a reduced maintenance, but LLMs are new to us as they are new to everybody. GPU compute and things like that is new to our organization. So we're working hard to bring tools like this to teams in a kind of a cost-effective, but also the most secure and responsible way that we can. And we've also started looking at some stuff around serverless options and things like that too. One of the things that I thought was quite interesting, this sort of possibly worth sharing, but I will gloss over quite quickly. If anyone is interested, please, we'll open up for a discussion at the end, is thinking about quantized models and how they can help. So using sort of smaller versions of these models that might work on existing infrastructure rather than using GPUs and things like that. So I've got some guidance in there, but also thinking about how that might affect the process. So what we found in the content design process, we tested some quantized models and things like that, just to think about how they might help. So we looked at smaller versions of the Mistral model in particular. And what we found was that it didn't really harm the content design process using these smaller versions of the models that run on cheaper tech, really. This is kind of consistent with what some of the academic research in this area has found. The quantization sort of only begins to harm you at a certain point when you're working with really, really small versions of the models. But one of the things that we have noticed that I thought was worth noting, if anyone is thinking of going down a similar path with this, is on summarization tasks that we've been looking at, these quantized models do fall over, and it ends up with some quite funny responses from there. So it's worth definitely benchmarking for your use case and thinking about where that might help. So on to our aims for the future, and this is sort of the wrap up, I guess, is what we're doing now is a time for feedback. We're hoping to deploy a bit of an alpha version of the product, I guess, thinking about what content designers think, putting it in the hands of those content designers and Mike's team, so they can give that first review of, is this helpful? Is this doing what we need it to, beyond the experiments that we've done? Does it get to that better first draft? And then we'll aim to expand out then to think about, people without that content design experience, is this useful? What do they think? And a bit of a user test of all that sort of thing. The last point I've got here is thinking about focusing on capability and organizational efficiency. So we hope to roll out the tool, as I said, to everyone, to sort of get around the feedback loops that we're in at the moment, where someone's going around to sort of senior leadership for approval on a publication, and then it goes to a content designer, and then there's lots of edits and changes that need to be made, and then it needs to go back around that feedback loop again. So what we're thinking about is trying to see where Dylan slots into that process to drive that efficiency. But we're also thinking about upskilling rather than de-skilling. There's obviously a lot of worry around using AI models and things like that and how it contributes to de-skilling. But what we're trying to do is build a tool that has that capability in mind, think about upskilling and how we can sort of educate people in that content design process alongside also improving those efficiencies and things. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming along today. If anyone's interested in some of our wider work, a bit of a kind of announcement at the end is that our technical blog is now available on GitHub. Evie's going to post a link to this in the chat. Thank you very much, Evie. So please feel free to check that out. We've got some really interesting posts on there. Some of Evie's work, which was in a seminar a few months ago on using AI to find lost ancient woodland. We've got some great stuff on topic modeling. So if anyone's interested in text off the back of this, maybe, please do go have a look at that too. So that is available. So thank you everyone for coming along. If there's any questions or discussion, I'd be really excited to hear that. And I think we're going to turn the recording off for the discussion. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free.